Okay, so let's look another. Yeah, I think Jaroslav, Daniel, yeah, all good to start, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Just before you, I know you've got a slide deck to present. How do you want it? I know there's like 4 or 5 different areas to cover. When someone raises, I mean, should we keep it quite informal as well? So as you present, if there's hands go up or anyone wants to ask a question at a specific point, just put their hand up and then we can take the question. Would that work?
Yeah, sure, no problem. No problem with that.
Yeah, obviously we don't want to kind of slow things down, but yeah. So guys, look, if you've got questions along the way, just anything's not clear or you want to ask anything, just put your hand up and we'll get you straight in. And yeah, let's do it that way. It's kind of a bit more collaborative. Okay, so Dragoslav, Daniel, over to yourselves, guys.
Okay, thank you for the opening, David. No you should be able to see the screen now.
Yes.
So perfect. So today we are going to introduce you ECCo-SP, a high availability setup. Firstly, let me briefly introduce myself and my colleague. So my name is Jaroslav Stejska, and I am IT project technical team leader. I'm working in the maintenance team since year 2016 on projects with ECCo-SP, OPDE, and PCR. And since beginning of this year, I'm a technical team leader for several customers who are using ECCo-SP solution.
Hello, my name is Daniel Janota, and since last year, I'm analyst of ECCo-SP development.
Okay, so let's start with the agenda. Firstly, I'll show you some prerequisites and general information about the high availability. We will take a look on the documentation, on the database setup requirements, and hardware requirements for the high availability setup. And I'll introduce you deployment of this ECCo-SP solution. Then we will continue with some details about configuration for external database and for the application cluster. On the end of the presentation, I'll show you some information about integration of business application with the ECCo-SP cluster. And then we'll follow a practical demonstration from my colleague Daniel, who will show you how to install the ECCo-SP cluster, how to register it to component directory, and then I will show you some integration examples. Okay, so let's move to the first topic, which is some general information about the high availability. Firstly, everything what is presented today is available in the documentation. High availability of ECP components is described in the ECP system design in chapter High Availability and Clustering, and in the ECP installation guide in chapter Installation in High Availability Mode. And for the EDX toolbox, detailed information are available in chapter in guide EDX technical design, in chapter HA deployment of toolbox, and in the guide EDX installation guide in chapter installation in high availability mode. Okay, so let's take a look on database setup requirements. So the first and the most important requirement on the high availability setup is that you need to install external database, because the default database, which is Apache Derby, does not support cluster. This is the local database, so it is not possible to use it for the application cluster. The supported databases are Oracle 12c and 19c, MS SQL Server 2016, MySQL 5.7 and 8, and PostgreSQL 9.6 and 13. These external databases requires some additional configuration. Anyway, all required configuration is mentioned in the installation guide, in the ECP and edX installation guide, such as for the MySQL, you can see the example that we require lowercase table names and max allowed packet at least 100 megabytes. But this is managed by your database administrator. Regarding the hardware requirements, as I mentioned, you need a shared database. So any of these mentioned external databases, or you can use the database cluster, which is optional for high availability on data layer. So again, this is on your database administrator, and if you need to achieve higher availability for the database, you can also establish the database cluster. The ECCo applications are prepared for this. Then for the application cluster, you need, of course, hardware for each of the nodes, of the ECCo nodes. So for instance, for the high availability of 2 ECCo components, you need 2 servers for ECP endpoints and 2 servers for edX toolbox with the same hardware setup. For the edX toolbox, you need to establish shared file system, and also for the file system shared folder for the integration channel via the file system, and the recommended file system is network file system. Of course, also other types will be probably working, but this is what was tested. The optional components for the high availability are load balancer, which can be used for access to a graphical user interface or to web service. You can install some standard load balancer like Apache HTTP or Nginx. And if needed, you can also install external ActiveMQ cluster. However, the ActiveMQ and the ActiveMQ cluster is already embedded in the ECCo, so this is really just optional. Rather, if you have already existing ActiveMQ cluster and you want to use it, then maybe this could be an option for you, but this is not very usual. Maybe I should also mention that on the ActiveMQ cluster, there is always only one active broker instance. So it is not like the higher cluster is the higher performance, but this is only about improving the availability of the ActiveMQ. When we are speaking about the hardware requirements, these are the same as for the single node installation, which means ECP endpoint requires 4 cores and 8 GB RAMs and 40 GB hard disk. And edX toolbox requires 2 CPUs, 4 GB RAM and 20 GB disk. Of course, for the cluster, you need to replicate these machines. We recommend the usage of virtual machines, which can be easily resized when more resources is needed. And of course, if you want to use a load balancer or the external ActiveMQ cluster, then you need additional hardware. But this depends on your needs, and the requirements are available from the vendor of these tools. So let's take a look on the easiest way how to establish the ECCo cluster, the high availability deployment. So it consists from external database and at least 2 ECCo component deployments. On the illustration, you can see there are 2 ECP endpoints with 1 external database, and when one component goes down, when one component goes down, then the second one will continue in the function without even without a noticeable outage. So this is the simplest way how to achieve the application cluster. Then this illustration shows possibilities how and on which levels you can cluster your deployment. So this application deployment was already mentioned. So this is like application cluster of ECCo components. Then, as I mentioned, you can have database installed in the cluster, and if needed, you can have even the ActiveMQ, which is responsible for the messaging in the external cluster. Today, we will demonstrate you this application cluster, because these are like more connected with this database and ActiveMQ platforms, and are out of the scope for the ECCo. Now let's take a look on some more detailed schema. This is schema for high availability for EDX toolbox. On the right side, you can see the data tier, where is external MySQL database, and also shared file system for the DMS, and optionally also for file system shared folder for the interface via the file system. Then there is application tier, where is EDX toolbox installed in the cluster. So you can see 2 instances of the EDX toolbox, and this EDX toolbox communicates with the ECP endpoint. Again, you can imagine there is another application cluster, like 2 of the servers. On the upper part of the image, there is the load balancer tier, which, as I mentioned, is optional and can be used for balancing of the traffic to the web application and to the web service API. Another option how to integrate with the what is that? Sorry. Another option how to integrate with the ECCo cluster or EDX cluster is via the NQP. So you can use a failover connection string. So straight in there. And the last option, which is not illustrated there, is to use the shared file system, DMS. Then there are also some other options like the usage of the FTP, but this is very similar to FSSF and Kafka, which is again similar to the ActiveMQ. Like again, there will be some failover connection string. So this is some overall picture of the high availability deployment. This is first part of the presentation. Do you have any question to this, let's say, introduction? We will continue with the more advanced configuration now. Yeah, I can see in the chat the 2 ECP IP address resolved by the external tools, not or reverse proxy. So business application sees only one address connection string. Okay.
Lab, just so you're and Daniel aware, we've got a couple of hands up. So go ahead, Christian, and then we'll take Boston off that.
Hi, I have 2 questions. One is can't it be set up without the shared file system? Is the shared file system really needed if you already have a database and sort of queue-based processing? And the second question is about default Docker setup. In the Docker, if ECP and EDX are already together, is the ActiveMQ a separate pod, or is it shared, or is it still two separate brokers per ECP and EDX?
Okay, so regarding the DMS, this is required for EDX toolbox. So for the DMS, because the incoming messages are stored to the file system, so you really need to establish.
Isn't it possible to configure some sort of object storage, like S3, like object storage, for instead of that, to teach the sort of out-of-date file system based logic?
Currently, the EDX toolbox supports only storage to the file system. So I don't know if you are able to achieve, storing the files with your solution. If the interface is similar to the file system, then yeah, possibly it could be used. But as I mentioned, the tested file system is NFS, and.
Are there any plans to teach the file system to some sort of object storage? Because what we have seen, the main reliability issues with EDX is that the database and the file system are out of sync, and especially if you try to put something into Docker, then the access to the file system, that's all complicated. It would be much better if it would be some web service based, and then that's why I'm interested if you are considering to move it to some object storage, like a standard object storage that could be then interfaced, whatever interfaces that object storage provides. Usually the object storage also provide file system ones, but also sorts of web service and other kind of accesses.
As far as I know, this is not in the backlog. No one required this feature yet. But anyway, if you find this interesting, you can create a ticket on ENTSO-E. Describe your.
I think I will take it up with David and the backlog. Anyways, and the other one was for the default Docker configuration, because I have seen that usually when we set up now the OPD node, there is like 4 brokers out of the box if you don't go inside. And I was interested if the default Docker images that you provide, what is the setup there? Have you sort of set up a separate broker there as well, or do you set up every instance with in the default image with its own broker?
I guess that you are talking about the ECP broker component. It is not like the broker for the ECP endpoint, but this is the central component for the messaging. If I'm correct, there is a Docker Compose configuration which contains all the components, right?
Yeah.
So there is ECP endpoint, ECP component director, ECP broker, and this ECP broker is not like the ActiveMQ, but this is the ECP component. So this is not the external ActiveMQ. The Docker images has only the embedded ActiveMQ brokers, but of course you can install external ActiveMQ container if needed.
Yeah, my proposal would be to have, I don't know what is the scope of this discussion, but my proposal would be to have like a good example implementation in Docker where you have separate pods configured for the AMQP, and then both ECP and EDX use that one, and I don't know, maybe in future also OPDM, because today is that OPDM validation engine has its own ActiveMQ, then the OPDM itself has its own ActiveMQ, and then EDX has its own, and ECP has its own. So it's usually, unless people know what they're doing, they will get four ActiveMQ instances. And it would make sense to provide already good example configurations with one or whatever is more appropriate.
Yeah, I see.
That's it from my side.
Good point. Thank you. Okay, we can see another hands. So Christian will go.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. And yeah, let's, as you said, Travis, let's raise a backlog ticket, and yeah, we'll probably have a number of these perhaps that that we'll identify during the session. Boston, go ahead.
Yeah. What I was wondering, for example, this high availability deployment, here the perception is that each component resides in his own logical server or in its own logical container. So also actually when we have the full schema deployed of the HI deployment of the ECP endpoint, then you will get like four, let's say four containers or four logical machines for, let's say, for ECP and EDX, and then you get additional ones for the database and additional one for the broker if you opt for this one. So actually you have like six logical let's say instances, logical servers at minimum supporting this HI. This is correct? What I was trying to further develop on is like, for example, if you opt for example, for some not so complex, I mean, is it possible to deploy HI on less complex level? For example, like you have one logical server for ECP and EDX, and then another one for ECP and EDX, and you have DMS store that would also work in this configuration?
Yeah, sure. Of course, it is possible. Very good point. It is possible to, for instance, have just two virtual machines where will be installed the ECCo ECPN plus EDX toolbox. And the point is that if there will be some issue with the virtual machine, that then you will switch to the second virtual machine. So if there are at least two virtual machines, then it should be fine. You just need a bit higher hardware resources, of course, if you have two components on the same server, but otherwise it is completely fine. And for the database layer, it is always recommended to have the database installed on the separate server. So it is not a very good approach to have it on the same server with the application. So at least 3 servers, like 2 servers for the applications and 1 server for the database. And as I mentioned, for the ActiveMQ, for external ActiveMQ, I don't see very, I don't see some added value for the high availability. Like if you have already existing ActiveMQ cluster and you have administrator who knows it, okay, then you can use it. But otherwise, to create a separate external ActiveMQ server only for this ECCo cluster, it doesn't make sense to me. So it is completely fine to use the ActiveMQ cluster, which is embedded in the application.
So I'm looking from the perspective of the at least complicated HI deployment. And I was wondering, is it possible to tweak out, for example, the HI deployment using a standalone setup and embedded database in a way that you have two logical servers switching back and forth?
I'm not sure if I understand correctly. You mean that you will have this single node installation with the embedded database, and you will have some backup which will be switched off, or?
No, I'm just wondering what is the least complicated HI installation? Because with each component you add, there is more complexity in administration and troubleshooting.
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, Boston, sorry, if I got this right, that's your first name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, but yeah, I was always getting it right. Yeah. So I think what Boston is asking, Dragoslav, is what's the minimum number of virtual machines that you could set up HA? I think Boston, if I'm not mistaken, what you're alluding to is that there's quite a lot of machines here to be deployed to make this work. Is that right?
the narrative here is that, for example, like for our experience, for example, like standalone deployment with internal database, this is the least complicated setup to troubleshoot with and you start with, and it proved quite reliable when you have some kind of the hardening of the environment. Now, my just question is, where it's possible to combine this setup also in a way of HI. I mean, what is the least complicated HI deployment?
Right.
Okay. I think it is count out of 3 servers, like 1 for the database and 2 for the applications, to make any sense. So it will be something like this, like 2 servers for the ECCo and 1 server for the external database. And for this shared file system, you can simply install the NFS on one of the application server, and the second one, so the second server will just mount this shared file system storage. So it should be fine to have the cluster, which is built on 3 servers. Of course, you can also install the database to the application server, so then you are on the 2 machines. But as I said, it is not recommended to deploy the database on the application server.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's all good questions here. So I think there's no other hands up at the moment. That is up, so I think you can carry on. Yeah, and I just checked the chat and we've covered that. Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a look on the configuration of the ECCo client. We will begin with the external database. So the first what you need to do is to configure the ECP properties and EDX properties file and change this value for Spring profiles active from ECP minus non-HA to ECP minus HA for the ECP endpoint, and for the EDX toolbox, change it to EDX minus HA. This is a common mistake because even when you think you have configured everything, database is ready, you have configured connection string to the database, and you forgot about these parameters, then the embedded database is used instead of the external one. So there is a separate slide for this. And next configuration is connected with the connection itself to the database. So firstly, you can see multi-line connection string queues. So you can divide these lines by these backslashes. And first parameter is this Spring data source driver class name, which is MariaDB in this case. The second one is the connection string itself. So again, there is some communication protocol together with the database name and some additional setup like the auto reconnect and hard encoding and some security setup. So this is the connection string itself. Again, the format is described in the ECP and EDX installation guide. Then, of course, you need some credentials. So there's ECPDB username and ECPDB password, and EDXDB username and EDXDB password, where you specify the credentials for this user. Then you need to specify the data source validation query, which is some simple query to make your connection to the database alive. And then the last one is a specification of your ID of your cluster. So in this case, it is node 1, and this needs to be unique within the cluster. So this is the main database, and then for the ECP endpoint, you need to specify the schema for the internal broker. So the configuration is very similar. the only difference is that there is a separate database for the internal broker. So again, you specify this, the connection string which contains the database name and some database setup together with the credentials to this database. If needed, you can also use the same database schema for the internal broker as the database. Object names are different, but it is not recommended. It is recommended to use the separate schema for the broker for the ECP endpoint. So this is regarding the database configuration. Daniel will illustrate you details in the practical demonstration a bit later. As I mentioned, this is documented in the ECP installation guide, in chapter 13, external databases, and in the chapter 10, external database. Okay, now let's move on the configuration of the application cluster itself. So now we have configured the database, and what else we need to configure? The first thing is configuration of the local instance ID. It was already mentioned in the database part, so this must be changed to unique value within the cluster. Then we need to change the internal broker IP to make sure that the broker is available for the second node or for the other nodes from the cluster. So it shouldn't be like something like localhost, but it needs to be exposed on the let's say external IP address or to all interfaces at least. And then everything is set up. And when you are establishing the cluster, you firstly need to register your cluster endpoint, which is done by starting only the first ECP endpoint. You will send a registration request to component directory, and after the registration request is completed, after the endpoint is registered and endpoint was synchronized with the component directory, then you can start up the second component, the second endpoint, and the configuration will be automatically downloaded, so the certificates. So this will be again demonstrated in the practical part. And now let's move on the integration with the ECCo application cluster. So the first way how to integrate with the ECCo cluster is via the AMQP or AMQPS. For ECP endpoint, you need to configure the IP address where your node is listening. So for instance, this 4 zeros for all interfaces. And then you need to configure failover connection string. For the ECP endpoint, it is internal broker URL. And you can see that there is example with 2 IP addresses for ECP internal brokers. For the EDX toolbox, it is very similar. Only the parameters are named differently. So there is an internal broker ActiveMQ host. Again, with some IP address achievable from second node. And then there is edxbroker.url, which is again some failover connection string on your internal brokers from node 1 and node 2. And if this EDX cluster communicates with the ECP cluster, then the ECP broker URL needs to contain the failover connection string on the ECP cluster. Again, you can see there are 2 nodes for the ECP endpoint, and this is equal to this internal broker URL configuration. And if you decide to use the MQPS for better security, then you need to also establish the authentication, which means you need to provide a JKS key store for the cluster together with the password. But this is a bit out of the scope for this presentation. And if you are interested in this secure communication, you can take a look on the ECP administration guide, chapter how to secure ActiveMQ API, or EDX administration guide, chapters how to connect to secure ECP endpoint over MQPS, and how to connect business application over MQPS. So this is about the MQPS setup. Next way, the easiest one is the integration via the FSSF channel. So this is shared storage. As I mentioned, the recommended technology is NFS. And you need to install the NFS server, which is then mounted to all the clients from the node. And then the publication or download of the file is made via this NFS server. So if you are if you publish a file, then you will simple insert the file to this file system folder, and it will be automatically processed by the active node, and this active node is driven by database lock mechanism. So this is used for coordinating of the active and passive nodes. So in the one time, only one client is allowed to read from this file system and to write to the file system. So this is the FSSF. And the last one is integration via the web service or access via the graphical user interface. As I mentioned, you can use a load balancer, which is demonstrated here. So you can see the business application can access the load balancer IP address, and then the load balancer decide which of the nodes is active. The second option is to use the virtual IP address, which means that your nodes has some configuration of the virtual IP addresses, and the virtual IP address is active only on the ECCo component, which is currently active in the cluster. So then you access to the virtual IP address instead of this load balancer IP address. And the last way how to access your ECCo cluster via web service when you have installed the cluster is simply use the multiple IP addresses, which means, for instance, on this example, you have two ECP endpoints. Each endpoint has its own IP address, and for instance, your business application can have some implementation like, okay, we have these two IP addresses, and if the first IP address is available, I will send the message via the first endpoint. If the first IP address is not available, I will try to send it via the second IP address. So if you are using the multiple IP addresses, you don't use any load balancer or virtual IP address, then you need to implement the switchover logic to your business application, like to try all available addresses for the web service. And for the web service, you can use any of the node for sending the messages. And so even when the ECP endpoint 1 is the active one, you can send a message via the endpoint 2, and it will simply forward the request to internal broker of the ECP endpoint 1 of this active one. So it is possible to use any of available addresses for integration with the web service. So this this solution provides availability to use all the IP addresses. File system provides one single point of folders where you put or read the files, and the NQPS provides a failover mechanism. So this is automatically detected which of the nodes is active on your cluster. This is all from this integration part. Are there any additional questions?
So I don't see any. Let's have a look. Just like to see if there's any hands up. I think there is. No, there's no hands up at the moment. Just double check that. Okay. I don't think there's. Let's just check the chat. Yeah, so there's nothing. Yeah, so I think you're good to carry on, Roslav. Yeah.
Okay, so now we'll move on the practical part. So my colleague Daniel will share his screen.
And again, guys, just jump in here. So when Daniel's presenting the kind of the walkthrough here, the technical part, just jump in, put your hand up, or if you want to, if anything is not clear or you want to ask something. Yeah.
Can you please comment which step are you going to execute? And so we know a little bit which picture we should have in mind when following your presentation.
Sorry, who was that asking that?
Bhutan, I was just wondering that I would appreciate if there are some comments following this practical implementation, so we can, let's say, more represent it in a way of the high-level architecture that was shown by Drahoslav, which step is now performed.
Thanks, Boston. Sorry, I think I understood most of that, but I didn't fully understand it. So did you say you want Daniel to present as planned, and then at the end?
No, I just wonder what we are going to see. I just want to say that, for example, like, look, guys, now we're going to set up this and this.
Right.
Is the, yeah. So just follow the Drahoslav implementation and
right
alongside.
I see what you mean, Boston. Yeah. So is this a yeah? Did you Drahoslav, did you pick up on that, and Danielle, what Boston was saying there?
Sorry, can you?
Yes. What Boston was asking is, what are you going to present now, Daniel? And is it basically following on from what Drahoslav has presented?
Yes. Daniel will firstly register or configure the ECCo cluster and then register it to ECP network, and all the information which was provided in this presentation will be demonstrated on the configuration. So external database and the ActiveMQ configuration and so on, and also the file system. So everything will be covered by this practical part.
Yeah, so I have a clean installation of ECP endpoint, and I will just configure the high availability mode. So firstly, as there was mentioned, I have to change the active profile, one of the really important parts for this, and then actually just configure the external database. So I will paste the connection string for the database, then some credentials. Validation query remains the same, so select one. And I have to also define some local instance ID. So I get P1, and also I have to add the data source driver class, which is the MariaDB, because we are using MySQL database. For the internal broker, I have different database. Also on MySQL, just specifically for internal broker. And here I also have to paste some credentials. So this is the part for the external database. And then for the failover, is the right word, implementation. Yeah. So here in the run URLs, I will paste the failover, which points to the both nodes. This is the first one and this is the second one. And also I will check the internal broker host is for zeros. And that's basically all for configuration of ECP endpoint. So right now I can start it. And in the meantime, I can start with configuration of EDX toolbox. So let's start with standard basic configuration changes. So the toolbox code and also service catalog code. Then in this section, yeah, I have to change the authentication alias to ECP module out and also change the MQB port because ECP and EDX are running on the same server.
Yeah, this is the example of setup which was asked
By me. By
Bastian. Like only 2 servers for the cluster.
Yeah.
When I wonder, for example, when we see this internal broker parameters in the ECP endpoint, I see this internal broker store a GDBC URL, and this usually points to external database, doesn't it? If you have one. For example, like in our case.
Yes.
In ECP properties. But was it there? I didn't saw it. It's like internal broker?
Yeah, it's internal broker.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay. Okay, yeah, okay. It's Merida database, sorry. We have SQL and I was used to that syntax, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe good to mention that we are using the MySQL external database for this example.
So then let's move to the external database configuration. So I will again just define different database connection string. Instead of Derby, we will again use MySQL. Right here. And also I have to change the credentials, the username. Password will remain the same in this case. And also I have to change the validation query to select one. This number can be true, go true, should be. The data center driver is also needed, and also specifically for high availability deployment. This property is active auto create tables. It needs to be set to. It will after the start of the application create, I think, 3 extra tables.
Yeah, this is like you don't need it only for the cluster, but also for the anytime when you are using the external database. So you can also do a high availability setup, like you have just one application and external database. And in this case, this is also needed.
Yeah. For the application cluster to configure some properties for the cluster specifically. I have to change the node ID, something unique. So like a TB1. Then also enable the high availability profile, which is right here. So change it to edx-ha. And in this section, again, I have to define the failover connections. So I'll copy this default configuration and paste the failover with URLs to both application servers with port 6672. So it's pointing to the EDX. Also, I have to change this IP address, this AMP host, to the current IP address of the server. So this one. Also, just to make things easier, I will change the ECP broker key server location and also the internal broker key server location to the shared storage, because after the registration, I will have to copy the key server from ECP endpoint to EDX toolbox. And that's everything from this configuration. So we just.
I can see Bastian has raised hand. I don't know if this is for some new question.
No, sorry, that was from
Okay.
previous. Sorry.
Yeah, and just to properly finish the configuration, I will also configure the FSSF channel on EDX toolbox. So I will just enable the FSSF endpoint. Create this, so in direction in, directory points to the shared storage.
I think you copied it to FTP endpoint.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, here. Yeah. So the directory is pointing to the shared storage. And also with those codes, I have to create a root so the channel can be used. Yeah, so some basic inbox and outbox routes.
And uncommand the FSSF line.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to activate the FSSF interface.
So this should be all. And right now the ECP should start it. So I will register ECP endpoint. So I will download the registration feature from component directory. And then use it for the registration. Yeah, fill some information about directory. This is a standard process. Yeah, and then some endpoint informations. Yeah, send registration request. Also approve it on the component directory. Yeah, and now just wait a minute for the initial synchronization. During this, I can maybe prepare the second node. So yeah, I will access the file system and prepare the second node of ECP endpoint. Here, the configuration will be completely the same, well, not completely, mostly the same. So I can copy whole file or content of the file and just paste it here, and then change the here the local instance ID to again to some unique volume.
Yeah, and the IP address remains the same as in this case. It's like 4 zeros. So all interfaces. So the internal IP address will be available for the second node. Yeah, should be all.
So let's quickly check ECP endpoint. Yeah, it's synchronized. So
is it usual to limit the internal broker not listening to all addresses, interfaces, or what is the usual step there? Internal broker.
Yeah. Usually we set up it like for one IP address. But if you have some more complicated installation with more network adapters, you may require to have it available on multiple interfaces. So maybe more secure option is to expose it only on the one IP address to avoid some network issues and so on. But usually it works fine even when you expose it on the all interfaces on the 4 zeros. So it depends.
Okay, so this relies just to MQP, eh?
Yes.
Okay.
This rely only to MQP onto the internal broker on which addresses the internal broker is exposed to for other nodes and also for EDX toolbox or business application, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've just quickly created the message path so that endpoint will be able to communicate with the endpoint of service catalog. And right now I can start the second node. Yeah, and again, in the meantime, I can prepare the second EDX toolbox node. And the process will be the same. So again, just use the same configuration with some minor changes. So again, I have to change the node ID again to some unique volume, and also the here the internal broker IMQP host to current IP address or IP address of this server, which is 110.64. The rest of the configuration will remain the same. Check the second endpoint node. Yeah, and as you can see, I was the dashboard is displayed, so the endpoint is currently registered as this one. So now if I send a message to itself, yeah, maybe we have to wait for a synchronization, so 2 more minutes. So yeah, in the meantime, I can change the configuration, the runtime configuration, to enable to enable MQP SEN handler. So the ECP handler will be able to communicate with EDX toolbox. SEN handler. So I will enable it for all message types. Yeah. And then this file is upload. Here you can see that the first node started reloading configuration, then the second node. And if I, on this endpoint, on the first node, I will download the configuration, you will see that the running configuration is applied also on this node. So they are connected to the same database, to the same tables. Yeah. You can check the message, and the message is successfully delivered in this case. I will download it, and it's also received. So right now I can start the EDX toolbox node, both nodes. Start without problems. Yeah. It will maybe take a few seconds. And there is some configuration issue.
Let's change this context.
Yeah, I also forgot to copy the authentication key after the registration.
This is why.
So that's the reason. So I will. What is happening right now is that EDX toolbox just doesn't trust, or the endpoint doesn't trust the toolbox. So the toolbox started with this error. So point, I will copy key store and then paste it to the shared storage. And don't forget to change permissions so the toolbox will be able to use this file. Then restart the toolbox. So probably I can take a few seconds. In the meantime, do you have any questions?
So I don't see any hands up, Daniel. Let's have a look.
I have a quick one, just a quick one. For example,
Yeah,
like,
go ahead, Boston. We've got time. Yeah, go for it.
I'm just reviewing our configuration files in a way, but for example, like when you select, for example, like standalone and external database, and this, then you specify Spring profile. It's like ACP mean my HA, so it's high availability. This is correct.
Yes.
Aha,
Yeah.
okay.
What is the connection string on the CPU here? I see. You forgot to define ECP broker URL. You see, the line with the this line. Just failover connection string to the ECP cluster. Because right now what is happening, the EDX toolbox is trying to connect on this IP address, this localhost N5672, which is not correct. So we need to specify the failover connection string.
Yeah, sorry for that.
Troubleshooting.
Yeah, just another couple mistakes.
Yeah, there are two levels of this NQP brokers. One is for the toolbox, one is for the ECP endpoint. So this is a connection to endpoint. Yeah. Again, running on the cluster.
And restarted once more. We'll also check there is a toolbox user. Not.
Okay, so
Or maybe actually this will be maybe faster just to change it in EDX toolbox.
yeah, to endpoint.
Yeah, because endpoint is already running. So yeah, so another mistake I've done is that I forgot to define the toolbox user on the ECP endpoint. So right now I will just change this user to endpoint. So
yeah,
which is defined.
This is user for NQPS connection. So usually you can define a separate user per business application. So toolbox can have its own user or business application and so on. But in this case, we will use just the endpoint user.
Yes, sorry for those mistakes. This can happen. So
These are the common mistakes.
yeah,
It is on purpose.
So yeah, so the ECP toolbox started in the first node. It's also synchronized with service catalog, and I will check the second node. Yeah, this is the first one.
Oh, yeah, I think you didn't change the configuration on this second toolbox for the connection string, so
Maybe done
you need
or
to.
yeah, so there is still missing the failover connection.
But this is a good example that you need to bear in your mind that every configuration change needs to be done in the both configuration files or every single node of the cluster.
Yeah, so users changed and the key store is copied in the shared storage, so now it should be okay. In the meantime, you can try to send a message to another toolbox in this network. So key tag, some message type, test, for example, maybe this, some file. And we can see that the message is successfully received. And the second node, you can see the message as well. So again, both nodes are connected to the same database with the same tables. And so this was the configuration of the high availability cluster.
Now, do you have any question regarding this configuration and installation part?
For the internal broker, you have an ECP, you have failover string, and you also have the EDX toolbox, also the failover string to point to each others. And both internal brokers or both components are communicating on the same logical server via this AMQPS interface anyway. So the failover string has to be defined on ECP and EDX level.
Yes. Or if you want to have like full cluster, like cluster of ECP and cluster of EDX, then you need two failovers connection string. Like there's one MQPS failover for ECP endpoint and one for the EDX toolbox. So when there's some issue on the ECP endpoint one, then it will work on the ECP endpoint 2, and the same on the EDX toolbox. So they are like two application clusters, one for ECP endpoint, one for EDX toolbox, and yeah.
Yeah, if you are using just one ECP endpoint, or you want to use the EDX toolbox in high availability, you'll here just add the one.
Yeah, it is possible to have just a cluster of the toolboxes and one ECP endpoint, but then it doesn't make a sense. Like it's not a real cluster.
Any other questions?
Okay, if there are no questions, then we have still some time. So I will show you some examples of the integration of business application to the ECCo SP cluster. So I will share my screen. And so good. So firstly, we will try to publish a file via the shared file system, via the FSSF. Daniel has configured the FSSF folder to this point, to this shared storage FSSF directory. For the outgoing direction, we are using this out folder. And what I'm going to do is to just insert a test file to the folder, and it should be processed and sent by the EDX toolbox. So I'll send some message to Cheetah, and the message type should be test FSSF. So let's try if it will be processed. It should disappear from this folder. Okay, it's gone, so it should be processed. And now I will open web browser, and okay, let's take a look on the toolbox. Good. Okay, and I can see some accepted. Okay, this is accepted, and this is for the Cheetah. Message ID 1. Okay, it arrived to the toolbox, but was not processed. Processed yet. We can check the logs. If there's any error message in the file. This is the old one.
In this problem with the DMS, because DMS is not changed to the shared storage. So
This is fine. Okay, so if you can just adjust the configuration, or if you can, if you can share the screen just to show what happened and how we will fix it.
This one, this, and quickly this. So here I have to find the DMS property. Yeah, and I have to change this property to the shared storage, which is here. Yeah, there are also DMS for pull messaging, but we will not use the pull messaging, so it's not needed. Yeah, this one, and then also change it on the another node. Yeah, here. Yeah. And restart components to use the configuration.
I'll try to send the message. Okay, I will try to send the message one more again. Share the screen again, and let's try to publish it again. Again, it should be processed. Okay, it's gone. Now it should be visible on the interface. Okay, it's still accepted, so let's try to check the log file. No content was found in DMS for I guess it is stuck on the first message. Share storage DNS. Okay. Found resource. Maybe we need to copy it. Copy the. Let's check the storage. One. Tiger to some files and what is the original location for somewhere in the opt. Data. Do you remember the original location of the DMS?
Default was used, and that was yeah.
Something opt, I think.
Yeah, but something.
Because what happened right now, I think the first message is still trying to be processed with the uncorrect DMS. Okay, meanwhile, I will skip this FSSF. I can try to find the location and the copy file to the DMS. Okay. The messaging will be working for other integration channels. Let's check. Test and some testing file. Okay. Okay, it's delivered now. It seems it's fine. Yeah. It seems some readable like a reprocessing of this message, and finally move to the. So yeah, it seems that this FSSF was processed properly now. So I'll try to place a file one more time there to the folder. Okay, and you can see that the status is delivered. It was delivered to the cheetah. So seems working properly now. So the FSSF is working. I can try to shut down one of the nodes. So let's try to. Okay. Let's try to check what is the currently active node. So. No, 6672. So it seems this is the active one. This is like the internal broker URL is active on the active now. If I will check it there, yeah, it's not there. So right now I will just shut down this toolbox, one of the toolboxes from the cluster. So stop. Systemctl stop edx toolbox. And we can see that it's not listening on the port 6672 anymore, and it should start listening on this second node, 6672, okay. And the FSSF message should be processed by the second node. So let's try it. Sometime box. Master, okay. I can see that the master was changed to true. So it's already master. And okay, why the file was not processed yet? See the configuration. Okay, DMS is configured properly. Node ID is tiger TV2. This is fine. And then I can check also the routing configuration. I see why, because there isn't activated the edx toolbox, the FSSF.
Yeah, that's good note. Yeah, sorry.
If you can copy the YAML from the or two, I'll just restart it. Yeah, again, even this routing configuration needs to be the same. Now, there and okay, route. So I'll just restart. Now it should be processed by the second toolbox. Takes some time. Oh, the initialization. Okay. Okay, and it's gone, so it should be processed. Let's check on the web interface. So right now it's running and get only the second node on this 64 IP address. And yeah, here we are. You can see that the message was processed. So working fine from the second node. So I will start back the toolbox one. Start toolbox, and let's move on another integration channel just quickly, a bit over the time, but just quickly, I will try to integrate via the AMQP API. So we will use the toolbox tool from this is the tool from our workspace, which we are using for testing the connectivity and simulating the business application. So I need to provide a username to the NQPS and the key store. Okay. I've downloaded the key store from the toolbox server. Okay, it is the key store password is password alias ECP module. Now, as we are using the key store from the endpoint. Okay. And now the connectivity, the failover string, this is the same which was configured by my colleague. Receiver can be sheet tag, message tag, test, whatever, ID, okay, can be whatever business application. No, QP, sorry. This thing. QP, whatever this correlation ID. Business correlation ID, and okay, I'll just make sure that I have downloaded the key stores to the correct location. So check. I will download it from the server. It is into, where is it? It is on the shared storage, right?
Yeah.
Shared storage and the key store, and okay, this is out key store. Okay, so I will use the out key store. Change the path to key store, and okay, content can be text, whatever. And let's try to send the message on the NQP failover connection string. So send. Okay, it will take some time. Message was sent, so it should be visible there. And you can see the message tag NQP. And we also have a reply. This is done via this correlation ID. If you fill in the correlation ID, then you will receive back the acknowledgement, the reply to the queue. It is endpoint reply, and you can see that this is like paired by the correlation ID, which is a 10. And if I will click receive, I should have a content shortly. Let's see. The message was received. What is this? It's 10. Okay, what is in the log file?
Wrong correlation ID.
Oh, it should be 10, I guess. Okay, there is delivered status only, so maybe this could be the reason. Anyway, we were able to send the message via the NQP business application to the cluster. For some reason, we don't have acknowledgement yet, but I think it's quite fine. What I can do now is just to switch off the active edX toolbox. It should be this one. Let's verify. Let's start. So stop. And this second toolbox should become active. see. And you can see mask message status has changed to true. So now this is the we have done the failover, and they will try to send a new message. Okay, I'll just use different relation ID. This can be the same. So sent. Message was sent. And if I will check the web interface, there should be another MQP message. Okay, of course, on the first node, because this was switched off. Yeah, and you can see there's a new message with the correlation ID 11. So working fine on the failover cluster. So this is for the MQP. And the last integration way is the SOAP UI via the web service. So I will use the SOAP UI tool. And I've already downloaded the definition of the VSDL interfaces. And right now I will try to send a message. So the receiver, I will fill in the receiver code, which will be cheetah, business type, whatever, for instance, test web service, sender application, okay, SOAP UI.
Travis, I've just got a question there while you're presenting. Yeah, so Ad has asked, what AMQP API test user interface application are you using?
The SOAP UI is testing the web service interface, the web service custom.
This is the question about MQP.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. What MQP API test your application?
This is some.
This is implementation from Unicorn. Some test tool which is not. I don't know if it is part of the.
Actually not. So
No.
That's the answer for his question. Also, this tool is not part of the ECCo distribution.
Yeah. This is just internal tool.
Yeah, just for testing.
This is not like real business application.
Yeah.
Some
Right.
mock one.
Yeah, and I think Boston, you were asking the same question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good. Perfect.
I'm sorry, Dronislav, would this test tool be helpful to the guys when they're setting this up, or how will they test it themselves if they don't have access to this tool? Like, is it something that
you can test like that the MQP interface is working properly on your components? I'm wondering if there is some additional value, like
right?
Yeah, I don't know. This is also
sure, yeah.
discussion. Maybe it could have some added value when we will publish it together with the source code.
For sure.
So, like the implementer of the business application can inspire with this example. So,
right.
Then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because we get a lot of questions from business who develop the business backends for testing. So this looks like a really good tool for them to use.
Yeah, and I think Christian is also agreeing with that. Okay, or EDX YAML reading tests. Yeah.
Okay.
So, no, go ahead.
I will forward this request to my colleagues, and I think on some upcoming meeting with you with ENTSO-E, this can be discussed. Like if we can publish this tool.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, certainly from what Bastian, Ade, and now Christian are saying is that this could be helpful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. So this was IQB, and the last channel which will be demonstrated is the web service. Okay, it's optional, so I will just comment these optional parameters. Okay, just this application, and okay, I need to add a header as we are using the authentication. Do I have it? Yeah, it's there, so I'll just simply copy it. Okay, I'll find the header with the admin passport, which is the credential on the web interface. The receiver Conchita. Web service is this edx164. And okay, I need to attach some file. So I will attach a test file there. Yes, and let's try to send it. Firstly, I will send it on via this 164 toolbox. This. Single. The message is slash message. Okay, I think I need to download it again. It comes. Okay, the certificate has changed, so remove and remove. And I'll just create a new project like so project from this. Okay. 164. Okay. This is running. 163 is running. Okay, and 164 is not running because I haven't started. It seems. Yeah. Okay. So meanwhile, I will try to send it via the 163. So new project, and it will be 163. Settle. Okay. It's there. Send message. Okay. Business type. Was index 463. Center application sub UI. Again, attach the file.
You accidentally deleted the message and step.
Yeah, thank you. And need the header. Security header. I'll copy it from the guide. So Give me a second. Authentication. And there is the header available. So in the chapter web says authentication. Place it just there. Should be fine now. Okay, let's try it. Message. Okay, it's there. Code should be fine. Maybe this one. Yeah, it was on 2 lines. Message, is it like this? Let's see. Message. Okay. So security. Token admin password, enter. And then there's body, cheetah, business type, content ID, and send the application. Seems fine to me. The other password. Let's try to. Open it. Yeah. Web interface, it should return the SDL definition. It's working fine. Fine. Let's try it one more time. Password, please your card. These optional parameters. Attach a file.
Also the conversation ID.
This one?
No, the last optional.
Sorry. Yeah, finally. Seems there was some mistakes of typo. And let's check the web interface if the message is visible there on the toolbox. So if I go back to the messages. Okay, you can see that it's there, test. Yes. So this was from this toolbox 143, and the same should be possible for the toolbox for the second toolbox. So again, I will import the project. So project 164. IDX 1. Okay, send message. Copy the request. Just respond. Enter. Secret code will be again cheetah, and business type is VS, and this time from 164. Center application is again Serve UI. This is optional. And I will delete these optional parameters. And also this conversation ID. This optional one. Okay, seems it was sent. I can check also on the web service level if I will check the check message status. And I will use this message ID. Again, I need to copy this security header. As we are using the secured web service. Okay, and you can see that the status is received, so it should be visible also on the EDX Toolbox GUI. Okay, let's see messages, and you can see web service 164 was received via the second endpoint. So, as I mentioned, both web services are active on the cluster. So you can see you can use any of these URLs. And this was the last point of the presentation of the webinar. So now, if you have any additional questions, let's just see the chat.
Yeah, there's been some discussion there in the chat between Anna and Christian Jaroslav.
Okay, so I see the question from Christian.
Yeah, Christian, did you want to jump in there and just elaborate a little bit more? But I can see the point you're making.
I can see a question that if there's a way how to restart, how to update YAML configuration.
So I don't know if you can hear me. I'm a little bit traveling already around out of office.
Yeah,
so
no, we can hear you.
Louder.
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
So many of those questions about the EDX UML file, we are currently playing quite a lot of it, and just thinking about the high availability setup. Currently, each time you want to change it, you need to restart the system, which is not maybe a huge problem, but still sort of, I would expect that there should be a way to set it up in really high availability setup where these routing configurations don't cause the restart of the system. At least that's one point what I think. And the other was just the usability, as you had this tool for testing the MQP API. I think it would be perfect if there would be either part of the EDX user interface, or there would be a separate tool where you could play around with this EDX UML file. Because currently it's just a text file. It's quite easy to make mistakes, and you might not know all the possible options there. So building some sort of UI, maybe even in first iteration, just a UI to import it, which would visualize the settings, validate it, and also possibility to edit and then export it, might be useful for many TSOs and RSCs at least. But that's what I think. Those were the 2 points that I wanted to make.
Christian, thanks. Let's Jaroslav, we can pick this up with yourself, Daniel and Anna, as one of the actions off the back of the call. Yeah, just to look at this in a bit more detail. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So,
but regarding this routing configuration, any change requires the restart of the toolbox.
Actually, if you are running the high availability setup, you can change the configuration on one node, and during the restart of on the one node, the second one will still be able to send and receive the messages. So basically, you are just
you can just
it's gonna be without outages.
Exactly. Like you can do the change on the node which is not active at the moment, and then do this the failover, the switch to the passive node, and activate the configuration without.
I have to say that rather than as a feature, that actually makes me more worried, because this means that there is possibility that the two nodes have different UML files and there is no check for that. So you might have different routings based on different instances, meaning you could end up with a availability setup for whatever user error or administrator setup where you have different routing files at different endpoints. That sounds quite scary in a way. There should be for sure a check that.
I see. Yeah. So in this case, if you worry about this, like to have the configuration consistent, then for the routing configuration, you can place the configuration file to the shared system, to the NFS, because the files are exactly the same for all nodes. So you can have it shared on the one place. And so if you change it, the router configuration, it is activated after the restart. So the active node will run still with this old configuration in the memory, and the second node will activate this new configuration after switch over to the node. So yeah, you can avoid it by using the shared fortune.
Yeah, no, that's fine, but I still see some possibility of error there. Either the YAML has been changed and the servers have not been restarted, and then one restarts on the nuts, or whatever. Only one was restarted. You can have this sort of unknown behavior. It's possible, not maybe very likely, but as they are not done so often, then it might be an issue. But anyways, I think that's a place for improvement. I'm not saying that it's something has to be done today, but it's something to think about, how to make the use of the UML file, both the configuration of it, synchronization of it, and editing of it easier. Yeah, that's the whole point.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Christian. And I mean, what we'll do is obviously Christoph is on the product owner of ECCo, as we know, is on vacation this week and next week. So we will. I think, what we'll do, Dragoslav, Daniel, is Anna, is have a regroup call with. In fact, I'll set that up for when Christoph is back, and just have an alignment call with Christoph to update him on how the session went, and obviously the key points that have been raised by everyone here, and then agree how we take those forward. And might be helpful to have maybe Christian, maybe Boss-Jan, maybe a couple of other guys in that call as well.
I'm also convener of this CDS expert or working group, whatever it's called now, which is actually the owner of this product. So I am writing down RFCs, and hopefully I can align with you, and then we will put them in the pipeline for the next session of the what's now CDS working group.
Okay, so who was that speaking? Was that Daniel?
Boss-Jan.
Oh, Boss-Jan. Okay. Sorry, Boss-Jan. I didn't see your thing come up. So sorry, Boss-Jan. Did you say you're the convener of which session?
Communications and standard delivery working group. Formerly, it was communications. What was CSG?
Yes. Could you, Boss-Jan? Could you put that?
I will type it in.
Could you put it in the chat? Yeah, good man. Yeah, that's please. Yeah, thank you. I think Christoph has mentioned that to me. So that's a, as you said, that's the right forum to raise some of these key points as well. Yeah. And I think, as Christian was saying, Dragoslav, Daniel, it's not like we need to fix this like today, but like we need to, we need to work out, what could be done as in terms of improvements. For example, the YAML file configuration, Yeah,
I actually logged 4 improvements, like it's possible to implement the object store to interface with standard APIs.
Yeah, Christian mentioned that as well. Yeah.
So, and then regarding the implementation in Docker, so to provide a single broken configuration for all components.
Right.
Then there is a publishing of AMQP test API tool. And there is having the same or aligned YAML configuration files aligned for HA cluster.
Right. So I think Christian has. I know Christian's been looking at they're currently testing the MQP. That's the same thing that you're testing, Christian, isn't it, with Prit and the team?
Yeah, we are looking into it. Also, there is. Yeah, I have a previous call was as well, but I have many ideas regarding the pull interface and this message slicing differences. I think Feder, who was previously leading, had similar kind of ideas to think about. How much the messages need to have this pull interface all together, but maybe this is going too far. Philosophical discussion. Anyways, David, I will try to summarize all the ideas that I have collected today as well, and I will share.
Thanks,
we'll
Christian.
share them again with extended one. But I think the things that are noted down are already very good.
Yeah, no, I agree. Okay,
we don't need to solve the whole world in one go.
Do we not? Oh, I thought that was the next step. Yeah. I think we can. Okay, no, good. That's good. And Boston, the points that you mentioned, did you say they've been logged? Where have they been logged out of interest? Are they in Confluence somewhere? Or are they?
Can you repeat, please?
Sorry, Boston, you mentioned the 4 points that you highlighted have been logged somewhere, written down. Where is that?
No. When I was listening to this session, I just write them down because in this working group we have different task forces, and one of them is also architecture.
Right.
Which looks into this one, and actually the Feder is the Spock for that one.
Who is that? Sorry.
Feder, Skavarak or whatever, the one that Christian mentioned. Feder.
Oh, I don't recognize. Can you type that in the chat? I don't recognize that.
Okay, you got me. Okay, yeah, I'll find it. I'll find it. But that anyway, I think that Christian, I think you're part of these groups. Are you? Christian, are you still on the line?
Yeah, I'm still in line. So me and Preet from Mellering are sort of, listen-in members. So we don't have time to actively participate all the time, but we try to keep up to date what's going on.
Good.
And then also if there are some ideas, we sometimes put them directly to the GitHub or GitLab of ENTSO-E, but we are not participating very actively.
Okay.
But we try to get all our ideas somewhere written down and then discuss if they make sense or not.
Okay. We'll keep in touch.
But Bastian, you are right that this is best to raise at the working group, because this is what the working group is for.
Yeah.
So if you could raise those issues there, it will be probably the best.
I will formalize it, and I will send it tomorrow to recheck whether the content is the right one.
Thank you.
And of course, we also have Christian at the session when we try to look into particular topics that he reported. So we try to align as much as possible with everybody.
Yeah. Good, Boston. Could you also could you include me on that note when you pull that together tomorrow, please? Thank you. Yeah, just so I just need to keep an eye on it while Christoph is out, and
no problem.
Good. No, was there anything else anybody wanted to raise with Tradoslav and Daniel? Okay, there's no hands up. So hopefully everyone's found this session really beneficial. I'm sure you have. Tradoslav, Daniel, thank you very much for, obviously I know there's been quite a bit of prep work that goes into these kind of sessions. So thanks for your prep work and for taking everyone through the setup. So what I'll do is I'll send out the recording as Christoph asked us to do. And in fact, a couple of TSOs, so for example, Adriano, Aterna and the team weren't able to make it. So they were asking me earlier if we were going to record the session. I said we were. So I'll get the recording out, and maybe I'll just put a summary of some of the key points that were raised as well, just as a all right, you know, maybe I'll wait until Christian and Bastian have provided their kind of thoughts, and then I'll send that out further tomorrow. But I think, yeah, so maybe actually I'll hold off on sending the recording out until we've got Christian and Bastian's points, and then we can kind of include that in the summary of things that will be discussed at the CDS WH. Yeah. Good. Okay, guys, if there's nothing else for us to discuss, again, Daniel, shout out ourselves, thanks again, and thanks for everyone's input on the session, and hopefully everyone has a good afternoon, what's left of the day. Yeah.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.